one talks about state capture, there's a tendency to use broad terms such as corruption, incompetence, thievery. There is a belief that there's a clear line of when something is right and when it slides into state capture without people realizing that they too could be part of the problem. This is not a story of the Guptas extracting billions from a crumbling administration, but rather a lesson in how this crumbling creates opportunities for abusing state functions. This particular tale involves Cash Paymaster Services, a subsidiary of Net1, who went into partnership with a government agency and reportedly extracted money from the poorest 18 million people in South Africa. This is a subtle insight into how the state has been abused for private profit. But first, let's get the basics straight. When Thabo Mbeki became president of South Africa in 1999, he created a program to expand the social grant system. And up until this point, grants had only really been issued to white, predominantly older citizens. The new expanded commitment to paying social grants would have a positive impact on millions of people and lift them out of poverty. Of course, it also bolstered support for the ANC as real proof that it was a party for all people. By 2004, former President Mbeki wanted to consolidate the grant administrative systems, and the South African Social Security Agency, or SASSA, was officially operational by 2006. SASSA was created to specifically manage the administration and payments to beneficiaries with money from the fiscus. In 2007, a tender was published to outsource the payment system. Although many bidders came to the party, this tender was inadequate in its description and was cancelled in 2009. In the interim, between 2007 and 2009, Cash Paymaster Services, or CPS, was paying social grants. SASSA then entered into a contract with the South African Post Office to develop government's capacity to pay these social grants. Of course, CPS was not happy with this. If SASSA pulled the work in-house, they stood to lose too much, and so they took SASSA to court. But all was not lost for CPS. In 2011, a new nationwide tender was released, and they had yet another chance to monopolize the payments of social grants. This tender included a segment about biometric security, which only CPS had developed, supposedly as a way of managing beneficiaries. Ms. Virginia Peterson, CEO of SASSA, issued a notice to all the bidders for clarification, making a subtle but significant change in the wording regarding biometric security. So biometric verification went from being a preferred requirement to a must. And with this one word, all other bidders except for CPS were eliminated. Keep in mind what's at stake here. A service fee of 16 Rand 55 per beneficiary. That equates to roughly 16 million Rand a month, invoiced to government. A booming business opportunity. And who pays the 16.55? Not only taxpayers, but also those people queuing for hours to get their grants, sometimes returning home because, the system was offline. But before we get sidetracked into the gritty reality of the people that actually matter, back to business. In 2012, CPS was awarded the tender, and the biggest competitive bidder, Allpay, went to court over the decision. Ultimately, the Constitutional Court would find the contract invalid for two reasons. Firstly, that subtle but essential change from preferred to must. And secondly, issues with SASSA's evaluation of CPS's BEE partners, or lack thereof. The bid required that BEE partners perform a significant amount of work. Not only was this never fulfilled, but when CPS did get legitimate BEE partners, they signed a separate contract that would outsource all the BEE partners' work back to CPS and receive a finder's fee. By now, all too familiar window dressing. A year later, in 2013, CPS double billed for re-registering beneficiaries and invoiced 316 million Rand for extra work done. Coincidentally, this was almost the exact amount that was needed to cover the costs of another BEE deal that Net1 had with some of the minister's influential friends. Peterson signed off on this amount and paid them their money. And from here on, civil society becomes a big character in the story. Corruption Watch submitted an application, and after several more court hearings, it was discovered that indeed no extra work had been done, and that Peterson was wrong in paying this fee. Net1 had to #pay back the money. These murky waters of private and public partnerships are not always a bad idea. There are things that private companies can achieve faster with more efficiency, but when a private company becomes an extension of the state, what then? Where do you draw the line between private entities and their overarching goal of extracting maximum profit and the state, which is in the business of looking after the people? These questions were not forcefully put to the company by the minister in 2014, so Net1 moved on to their second business opportunity, which unsurprisingly was selling financial products to the 18 million people they were servicing. This further bolstered their margins with a potential earning of 75 Rand per beneficiary per month through selling insurance, microloans, funeral cover, airtime, electricity. In essence, government paid Net1 to build infrastructure and networks, and most notably mine the data of the 18 million grant beneficiaries. Net1 was at this point a monopoly, using its access to government to bolster their own bottom line. And so the conflict between the public and private sector deepened. Profiteering through ancillary financial products is in direct conflict with the purpose of social grants, which is to redistribute and not to extract profit. At this point, Net1 was now fully operational in not only servicing the 18 million beneficiaries, but also selling financial products through sister companies such as Moneyline and Smart Life. The third tender was published in 2015, but the bid stated much lower fees per beneficiary, with the effect that nobody actually wanted to participate in the bidding process, once again leaving CPS as the only bidder. In response, SASSA communicated with the Constitutional Court, promising to assume the work from CPS when the contract ended in April 2017. This seemed to be a turning point, with SASSA apparently now having a clear mission to take over from CPS. Ms. Batabile Dlamini, then Minister of the Department of Social Development, initiated another program with a Ministerial Advisory Committee, as well as work streams which were supposed to assist with SASSA assuming the grant administration. These work streams were made up of external experts, and the task of compiling it was handed to Peterson. It would seem that Peterson resisted the idea of these work streams, presumably as they would report directly to the minister, potentially undermining her own authority. When Peterson left in early 2016, little to no work had been done to ensure this 2017 handover. With only 4 months before the handover was supposed to take place, Mr. Thokozani Magwaza took over as SASSA CEO, and Mr. Zane Dangor was appointed new Director General of the Department of Social Development. Dangor and Magwaza were determined to end SASSA's entanglement with CPS, and they worked to move the administrative operations in-house. However, they came into conflict with Minister Dlamini, who was adamant to keep the work stream's grand plans and extend the illegal CPS contract. This conflict would ultimately end with Magwaza and Dangor both quitting and later testifying against Minister Dlamini in the Constitutional Court hearing in January of 2018 for her alleged role in delaying the removal of CPS. While the media and civil groups rallied around grant beneficiaries, trying to understand what would happen in April 2017 when the CPS contract ended, Dangor and Magwaza were trying to secure a deal with the South African Post Office to once again eliminate the need for CPS. In a committee meeting on the 1st of February 2017, 2 months before the contract with CPS was due to end, Magwaza presented the short, medium and long-term strategy of SASSA. One of the discussion points at that meeting was the absence of Minister Dlamini, who had already requested the meeting to be moved due to her unavailability. But this statement made by Magwaza during the presentation highlighted the two crises that were unfolding before South Africa's eyes in March 2017. If you've got to choose between paying the grants and irregular, and if the country's going to burn on the 1st of April and the irregular, I choose the country not to burn. SASSA had known about this deadline since 2013. And yet, somehow, a national disaster loomed. The entire debacle seemed self-created, not by mismanagement, but by deflection, obfuscation, and a determined pattern of not fulfilling obligations to either the state or to the nation. And civil society was in uproar, and for good reason too. The consistent pushback by groups like the Black Sash, Corruption Watch, forced the hand of Parliament to crack open the agendas of SASSA and ensure that recipients were paid their grants. While all of this was happening, yet another red flag was lifting. Shortly after, the Constitutional Court released a scathing judgment on how SASSA had bungled the matter, highlighting Minister Dlamini's role in the crisis. Former President Zuma reshuffled his cabinet yet again. And it was in this reshuffle that Mr. Pravin Gordhan lost his ministerial seat. But somehow, despite this incredible debacle, Minister Dlamini kept hers. And many believe that her fervent support of former President Zuma, not only in her personal capacity, but also leveraging the weight of the ANC Women's League, gave her patronage support and ensured her survival. CPS was finally smothered out by the end of 2018 when a new agreement with the post office was sealed. The CPS relationship brought out the worst of the private sector and clearly showed the cracks in the system. If we allow ourselves as the private sector and civil society to participate in, or to endorse through apathy, a crumbling administration, then we are part of the problem. I choose my country. Do you?